Góðan daginn, gott fólk, og verið hjartalega velkomin. Gaman að sjá ykkur. Bara ein spurning áður en við höldum áfram. Sjá ekki allir vel á tjaldið? Blesslegt. Gott mál. Ég heiti Halldór Másson frá Opin Kerfum. Býð ykkur innilega velkomin á þennan fundum öryggismál. Fundurinn tvískiptur hjá okkur í dag að í fyrirhluta kynningarinnar ætlum við að fara yfir nýju persónuverndarlögin sem að taka gildi 2018 næsta ári. Þannig að ekki fara yfir lögin sjálf, heldur hvernig við getum undirbúið okkur fyrir gildistöku lagana og þá að sjálfsögðu með tilliti til upplýsingatækni. Það eru ákveðnir hluti sem við getum gert til þess að undirbúa okkur og við höfum fengið hérna mjög góðan gest frá Danmörku, Jan Pálsby frá AM Partners í Danmörku og þeir hafa mikla reynslu af því að vinna með viðskiptavinum stórum og smáum í öryggismálum, upplýsingatækni, greiningum og öðru slíku. Og seinni hluti kynningarinnar mun fara í að kynna tól sem heitir Rsa og verkfæri frá HP sem að hjálpar fyrirtækjum að halda utan öryggismál, greina veikleika, sjálfvirknivæða ferla og hjálpa okkur í hvívetna við að passa upp á að allt sé í lagi. Nú, bara ég hvet ykkur til þess að spyrja og bara rétt upp hönd og vera ákveðin ef það eitthvað sem við viljum fræðast nánar eða hafið athugasemdir. Jan mjög bóngóður og tekur slíkum fyrirspurnum vel. Öðru leyti þá bara langar mig að bjóða ykkur aftur hjartanlega velkomin og vona að þið njótið stundarinnar með okkur. Jan, I just told them a lot of nonsense about you and
thank you.
But the floor is yours. There you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming this morning. Is this okay? Everyone can hear? Okay. We are going to talk about GDPR today in the first presentation, and then afterwards we have a presentation where we are going to talk more about solutions and some of the more technical sides of this. But actually this presentation is we're trying to boil down a lot of information from the EU to I think we have 7 slides or something. So it's a lot of information, but we try to highlight the things that is relevant for you, and made it in a checklist approach so that you can say, well, what is it that you should be aware of as a company when the GDPR is implemented, and then I got a small point in this presentation. I actually will try to argue that this is good for European business doing this, even though many companies see it as a huge challenge. First of all, there are some dates to be aware of. First of all, this regulation, it replaces the former directive from EU. The difference between a directive and a regulation is that a directive is something that EU says to the states, we want you to enforce this, but it's up to the states how they enforce it. It's up to the states what fines they will have and so on and so forth. A regulation is something that the states have to enforce exactly as the Commission have written in the regulation. So that's a major difference in this. In January 2012, EU decided to make a change to the directive, and in May, the 4th of May this year, so that's last year, they published the text but it's still not enforced, and it will be from the 6th of May 2018. So basically, EU gave the states 2 years to prepare for this, but after the 6th of May 2018, there will actually the states are committed to enforce these rules. Yeah, so that's the dates we have to be aware of. What's the purpose of doing this? This is, of course, EU wanted to give back the control over data to the citizens of EU, and they also wanted this to be something that made it easier to do digital purchasing and enable this market a lot better than it is today. And then, of course, there are some harmonized across the countries. Today in Germany, there's a very strong culture about how to protect personal data, and in other countries it's a lot different. So EU wanted this to be the same all over. Okay, so why is this good? If we look at how the citizens of EU look at how their personal data are being handled today, they're actually very worried about how it is going on today. Many people say that they are afraid to become a victim of frauds. They are afraid that their identity is used for other purposes than what they consent to when they purchase a product or whatever. And you probably all experienced this, that you search for something on a search engine and search for a product, or maybe you look for a product on a store, and then suddenly later when you're looking at Facebook, you have these advertisements for that same product, and you were wondering, how did it know that? And this we will see more and more happening. Then this last bullet here is about what EU are calling profiling. So here we are actually profiling customers so that we know by knowing their habits, by knowing their interests, we can market products more specifically to those persons. And that's something that many people are uncomfortable with. Then there's the confidence. 63 people, more than 60 people, 60% of all people in the EU have no trust in telephone companies, in online businesses. And why is that? It's because they see over and over again when they give information, they see proofs that that information is used in other content where they didn't expect it to be used. The last thing here on this one is that we have all given up in a way of trying to protect our personal data, because we know that we have to accept certain things when we are doing business with, when we are purchasing products from online service companies, from telephone companies, and we simply, there's no way around it. We just have to give this information, and we have to put the tick mark. I agree. I have it's okay that you use this data. Otherwise, we'll not be able to purchase that service. Sorry. So this is the reason that EU had taken this initiative, and it's, from my point of view, also the reason why this is good for business. Because if we know that our customers actually worry about this, then I personally believe that we are willing to pay a little more for a service delivered by a vendor that we know have to live up to much more strict rules. I mean, when we are purchasing food at the store, we decide what products to purchase based not only on what's on the product, but also where it's coming from. Because we know when it's coming from Iceland or when it's coming from the Nordic countries, there are really heavy regulations on what you can do. Whether if it's made in China or other places, we know that it might not be the same quality. So I believe that will be the same on digital services in the future. We will actually prefer services provided by companies in the EU. Okay, so now to the checklist. What's actually in this regulation? What is it that EU want to regulate here? And there are 10 they have made a top 10 list. That's even 10 is a lot, but I think it's possible to relate to at this level. First, there's the data security. There is an obligation to take care of personal data. We will have personal data in our companies in the future, because we have to, by law, we have to keep registrations on our customers and who purchased what and so on. So we cannot avoid that. So therefore, we must take care of this. And as part of this data security, there's a notification part, because we all know that we can do a lot to protect our data. We can set up firewalls, we can install advanced CM solutions to help us identify breaches and everything, but we cannot guarantee that there will never be a breach in our company. So therefore, there's the notification requirement. The notification requirement actually enforces that we are obligated to notify not only police or government that there have been a breach, but also the persons who has this person that this personal data belong to. So in case a telephone company has a breach, they're actually supposed to go out and tell this to all their customers that this breach have taken place. And they have 72 hours from the breach until it's they have to inform about this. So then there's consent, number 2 on the list of 10. Consent, we all know today, when we do something, there's this page coming up with, or actually it's not one page, it's many pages of text, and we have to press agree before we can continue. Well, this is something that EU is trying to do something about, but it's of course difficult because how can we make this simple? But what we are saying here is it has to be specific, and it has to be unambiguous, and it has to be the consent have to be given in a way we cannot put check marks saying that's pre-filled in, and then we just press agree. We have to, as customers, specifically put those check marks ourselves on each thing we consent to. Does that make sense? That little difference? So, and that's what we're talking about down here. So consent is very important in this. And we're coming a little back to consent because that's something that's going to be continuing throughout this. Okay. Third bullet. There are some roles that we have to have these persons in our companies. There have to be a controller, a processor, and the controller's role is he's the responsible person. Usually there will only be one controller in a company, but there can be several processors. The processors are responsible for doing what the controller have stated and the regulations he's set in the company. So the controller is the one who will go into court if there's a lawsuit, but he has these processors to help him actually enforce what he's supposed to do. But he's the responsible person. And his responsibility is basically to know about GDPR, know about what are the requirements, what do his company need to do to live up to these and to be compliant with this. So he will be that person, and we actually have to identify these roles in our company. That's part of the regulation. If we don't, then we will not be compliant. Then there's the DPR, and that's the data. That's the data processing officer. No, just want to say this correctly. Anyway, he's also mandatory. It's another role. He's that's more about the data itself here. He's the one that's responsible for the data. He's responsible for having the consent from the data subjects. He's the person that you can say he's supposed to train the DBAs to identify the databases where we have this personal data and look for it and make sure that they know how to take care of it. So that's his role. So these roles are very important, and we can actually be sued if we don't have these roles appointed. Yeah, I think that's it. Okay, profiling. That was what I was talking about in the beginning of this presentation. This about that we have all these citizens that are worried about that we're looking at what are their interests, what are their hobbies, and so on. We are actually still allowed to do profiling, but if we do it, we have to inform the data subjects, the persons, and we have to tell them what logic we are doing on their data. So how do we actually come to the conclusion that this guy is fond of fishing, for instance? And we also have to tell what the consequences are. And what do we mean by consequences? Meaning, how are we going to use this profile? Will we use it for advertising? Will we sell the information? Of course, that's illegal, but I mean, we could bring it on to some of our subcontractors for some reason. And as long as we inform about this and the data subjects don't object to it, then it's actually okay to do profiling. But it's very much different from what we've been able to do with the current. Yes?
They have to accept it. The implied consent is not.
In this case, you are. They don't necessarily have to make consent to this, but they have to consent that you do profiling as top level thing when they fill in your form, and then you must inform them what you're doing with it, and they don't have to accept that specifically, each of those bullets, as far as I understand this. But if they object, I don't want this, then you're not allowed to do it. And this is something that actually becomes very complicated for the companies, because now we have these databases doing things with our data, and suddenly we have to have a kind of a checklist where we verify on what data subjects are we allowed to do this, and who are we not allowed to do it with. So we cannot just process all our data in the same way. That's becoming a huge challenge to many companies. We have to split our data into who have actually objected, and we have to take that out. Well, this is actually good news, because pseudonymization is a very difficult word to say, but this is about having anonymous information. That's okay. We can have in our database, as long as we call the data subject something else than what they are really called, we can do with that data whatever we want, because then it's actually not regulated by the GDPR. And that's very important when we are going to talk about what to do about this. Because as long as we anonymize the data, we can do statistics, we can do analysis on user behavior and all that, as long as we haven't identified the specific persons by their name or their social security IDs or whatever we identify them with. Yep. Yes, exactly. By gender, by age, by everything that doesn't identify them as a person. And that's actually good news. And so everything else in this presentation will not be applicable in such a case. Cross-border data transfer, it's very obvious here that there have been some very strong influence on this paragraph, because if you're reading the text, it's huge. And there have been some companies trying to get around this one because we all know that we have a lot of outsourcing providers in India and China, service providers that actually host our data. And in such a case, they have to live up to the same regulation. So first, EU put in a term here about that, they have simply to, that those states have to enforce the same rules as we do in EU. But of course, the companies couldn't live with that because now if that was the case, they couldn't outsource anything to outside Europe. So there is actually under certain circumstances, we are actually allowed to do this. And certain circumstances is that we have made a contract with the subcontractor where the subcontractor state that they will live up to this regulation and all the sub-content of that. So if we do that, it's actually adequate, and we are still allowed to outsource and host our data in other places. And that's also, I think, no, that's another one. Next one is the right to be forgotten. Well, there's two issues here. First of all, if we as a data subject say to our telco vendor, I want you to clear all your data about me when I stop being a customer at your company, for instance. Then then the company will have to do that. But also there's this about data is no longer needed. So if the telco company by law don't have to keep the data anymore, they are actually enforced to delete it. Does it make sense? If we, for instance, if we by law have to keep the data for, I don't know, 2 years after the contract with the customer is closed, then of course that's okay. But then after that date, we have to delete it. Even though the customers don't care about it, we still have to delete it. And there's also a limitation on this one, because there can be reasons why we have to keep the data. As I said before, there could be a law saying we have to keep the data 2 years after the data subject left, and in that case we are allowed, even though he objects to it. So it of course have to be that way, but yeah, just for the record. Yeah, without due delay, what does that mean? How long time do we have to actually delete them? There is a lot of information in the regulation about this. What is actually without undue delay? What does that mean? How long time is that? But and they have some phrases about as long as it's the cost is not overwhelming and things like that. So it's not a precise date. You can't say, well, we have 2 weeks or 2 months or something. It will be up to the companies to figure out how quickly they can do this. Well, then there's a code of conduct. This is actually this is actually just about that we set a set of policies in our company that we write on our own and that we live up to. We train our staff. So if there is an issue, if there's a lawsuit, if we end up in court, we can say, well, we have actually done a decent piece of work trying to train our staff to do things the right way and live up to these regulations. Specifically, we have decided to do this and that because that is what is needed in our company. Okay? So it's simply, and we can even have in larger companies, there could probably be internal certifications. There will, of course, be certifications, and already are certifications available that some companies provide. So, last bullet here. GDPR expressly recognized certification as acceptable mechanism. It's about actually demonstrating that we are trying to live up to this. That's very important, actually. Because there will be cases where things didn't turn out exactly as it was supposed to. There will be cases where there will be breaches. There will be cases where data subjects object to something and it's still misused or whatever because of errors, because of processes failing in the company. But if we can demonstrate that we have done what we could, then we will most likely not be prosecuted. Okay. Then the last of the top 10 here, that's we should be aware of, is the fines. And as you can see, it's quite heavy fines. Actually, what EU is saying here, we don't want you. This is something that we want enforced. Unfortunately, for the smaller countries, and for the smaller companies, it here says whichever is the highest, this percentage of worldwide annual turnover or the fixed fine price. And that is a problem for small companies. So I don't know how exactly this, and I don't think anyone know how exactly this will turn out when a small company goes to court, because these fines in this level will close down smaller companies. But that's how it's written right now in the GDPR. And what is it? What's the difference? When is it that we have the high fine and when do we have the low fine? Well, that's about consent. That's very important. It's data transfer. If we transfer data to another company without any legal reasons for it, if we collect information, data that is under this regulation and use them illegally, and then this obligation to the right of freedom of expression, I don't know why they put that in here, because it's actually, it's a little strange that it has, because this is actually about the opposite, about keeping secrets about people's, but it's here. So if we do something where we limit the right of freedom of expression, then we can actually also be prosecuted on this one. Don't know exactly how they want to do that. The lower fines, that's the notification part. It's something about assigning the roles we were talking about, and they've specifically mentioned the DPO in the text here, in the violation consequence section of the GDPR. So DPO, I think it's a very good idea to appoint that person very quickly. And then, of course, as it is today, the loss of customer confidence if we are in the press, and there will be press, especially on the first cases that's going to court due to the GDPR. Okay, I've tried to then, actually now I say it's a takeaway from today, but maybe it's more like a recommendation. First of all, I have to say that I'm not a lawyer, so you can't sue me if someone come and prosecute or tell you that you've done something incorrectly, of course. But I think actually also lawyers will not give those guarantees. It will be up to the companies themselves to live up to these things. But my recommendation here is to look at what can we do relatively easy without a huge cost for the company, and within the next year get this in place. This is possible. I mean, appoint those roles, get those people appointed. That doesn't take several months. Then I think what you should do is take out 2 days with all your DBAs, data owners, put them in a room and tell them, we need to know in what databases today we hold personal data. So that you have that map, you know exactly where this data is, what should you be aware of. Just that, having that map available will put you in a much better situation if someone knocks on the door auditing this. Because you can say, well, we have actually done the data mapping, we know exactly where the data is, and we know what we're using it for. We know who have access to it. Then there's the encryption part. It's very difficult actually to encrypt data. It will, in many cases, mean that you have to completely rebuild your application to work with encrypted data throughout the process of in all the places where you're using the data. But there I think you should consider looking at format preserving encryption. I'll be talking a little bit more about that in the next presentation, how you can actually achieve that. But that's something that should be achievable in many of your systems without completely changing everything. It will, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, it will be a much greater job than the two top ones here, but at least consider looking at that. Then there's a consent part. I'm sure if you look at how you do today, how you have this agreed to all these lines of text, that page you can probably change without completely rewriting the whole setup. It will, of course, take some effort. You will need to do some changes, but having some check marks that the user have to specifically check before they say, I agree, I think that will put us off in a much better situation just by doing that. And at the same time, we are demonstrating that we understand that we have to do this. Again, the code of conduct. Monitor, I mean, if you're not doing it already, you need to do some monitoring. Some simple security monitoring. So that you, at least if there's a breach, have a chance to understand what's going on. And I mean, sometimes we are assisting companies that have had breaches, and if they have nothing before the breach, then it's almost impossible to get them back on track, because we don't actually know what have been breached. So it takes a tremendous amount of time. So have that monitoring, simple monitoring first. I think that's very important. Then notification. We have 72 hours to notify our data subjects about a breach. That's impossible if we've not thought about it before it's actually happening. So building that plan, I think that's important. We all know that we cannot guarantee won't have a breach. So there will be a breach sometime, maybe for hopefully a small one, but still we'll have to notify. And that's just paperwork. So it should also be achievable within this first year. Then stage 2, this is where I believe that this is probably, that might not be for all companies something that's achievable within a year, but something that we should be looking at. On the monitoring side, I think you should consider analytics, because monitoring is good, but the amount of data that we are collecting when we are collecting security logs are huge. So we need some analytics to assist us in identifying what is actually relevant to look for. And then the right to be forgotten. I think that is probably one of the really difficult ones to achieve. I mean, think about integrations. We have integrations, and then suddenly, well, that system, we have not encrypted data, so therefore we have not anonymized data, so we're putting it over there. Then we have to take out those persons that have asked us to forget them, and things like that. It will become really difficult, and in the other database we have to keep them because by law we need them there. So there will be a lot of work here to actually 100% live up to this one. Then there's our subcontractors, and maybe that one should actually be up in stage 1. We need to have that contract with our subcontractors. If we have service provider, outsourcing vendor that hosts our data in India or somewhere else, we need to have these contracts. Otherwise, it's so easy for the lawyer or for a reviewer to say this is not good enough. If we have the contract, then the lawyer have to go to the subcontractor and go through all their processes to make sure they live up to the regulation. And that's a huge job. So as long as you have the contract, that I would definitely go for. Okay, there will probably be someone thinking, let's see what happens. We will probably not be the first one that will be dragged to court and pay the heavy fine, so let's see how everyone else is doing this. And that's of course an approach. It's a cheap approach, But I think that especially the companies that are known for having a lot of personal data, they will be reviewed. I mean, banking industry, insurance industry, telecompanies, online services, internet providers, everyone knows they have the personal data. Whereas if you are an aluminium production vendor, production site, then you are doing business-to-business relations, and you will probably not be the first in line to be reviewed. But there will be some companies that have to do something about this. So do nothing is probably not the best option. But I think if you just go through what's in stage 1, you're much better off, because then you have demonstrated that you have actually trying to live up to this, and that's will make a huge difference in a review. Two minutes over time, but I think there's still space for more questions. Thank you for the questions during the presentation, but please feel free if there are more questions. That is correct, but what I'm trying to say is that it's almost impossible for you as a customer with an outsourcing provider. Let's say you have Tata or Tech Mahindra to host some of your systems and your data, and if you do that, then it's almost impossible for you for your company to review and make sure they live up to this. But if you have made the contract and they have signed and said, we do live up to this, then you have a much better position if someone comes asking you what you're doing. That's what I'm saying. But you're right, it's your responsibility to take care of this data. So if you in any way have a suspicious that they maybe signed the contract but they're actually not living up to it, then of course you are responsible for that. Well, did that answer your question?
There's always more questions.
Yes, but I mean, and there's also always, I mean, there will be discussions about this, because how do we interpret what the law is saying, and that will be interpreted in the court and everywhere, but what I'm trying to say is, as long as you are doing what you can, and actually that's something that is mentioned in the text many places. Is this about within reasonable costs, for instance, could be a phrase. You should enforce this, or you should make sure about this within reasonable costs. So if it, and everyone will know that if you should review Tata or Tech Mahindra living up to this, it would cost you millions, and of course you cannot be responsible for that. And that also applies for many of the other regulations. This about a reasonable cost. Other questions? And what is reasonable cost? Yeah. Well. Okay. Thank you very much for attending. We'll have a small break. And after the break, we'll go more into breaches, example of how hacking activity is done, criminal activity is actually how do criminals get into our companies, and what can we do about it? Okay? Thank you. I think we got our small break, so let's get started again. It sounds like somebody postponed the spring outside, so but hope you can still hear what I'm saying, even though we have this wind. Well, this presentation is not about GDPR, but it's very much related to it, because we're talking about some of the things we can do to better live up to the GDPR. And the first part of the presentation, we are talking a little bit about how what's happening right now, and how are the breaches, how do they look like today. Actually, we had one this morning in Denmark. It was a smaller company that they had the managing director of the company sent an email to his accountant team to pay a bill for some consultant work that a Polish company have done for them, and then it was something that had to be paid urgently. And then the accountant team wrote back to him, are you sure? Is this okay? I mean, we usually have 30 days to pay. And he writes back, yes, no problem. You just go ahead and pay that one. And then another one in the accountant team write to the managing director again. I don't understand, because I haven't heard about this consultancy company working for us. No, but that's because they did something for one of our customers, but we agreed that we are paying it. Okay, so they pay the bill. But unfortunately, this was of course not coming from the managing director. Somebody have hacked his email account and got completely control over it, so they could get all the emails coming into his account and respond to them. It was in the newspaper this morning. So it's happening all the time. And actually, I think it's one of the bullets on this one about mail. Phishing attacks down here. So it's something that we see a lot in the industry, and this slide is actually from 2016 and was built in 2015, so it's already worse than this. And now we in the previous presentation, I was talking about monitoring. And actually, monitoring part is here. We want to collect information about what's going on, what's happening, who is trying to log in with passwords unsuccessfully. We want to know to get this information about attempts to connect to databases and so on. We also want to know about what's going on our DNS, and that's something that we are coming back to, because that's a huge challenge to look at that kind of information because there's so much. And then there are the alerts, and there are many alerts here. And then we have to squeeze this down to a few incidents because as human beings, we can only handle very few incidents. So this is very important to try to narrow this down. But if we are not doing the logging, we cannot do anything of the rest. The rest of this can actually also be processed during an incident. Of course, it's not very, very good doing it in that way, but this have to be something that's taking place now. Otherwise, it's really difficult to get back in control after a breach. I think this one is actually saying the same thing as I just said, so I'll just... When talking about security, there are actually two major areas that you have to be aware of. You have to look at the technology that you can implement to identify breaches, and then there's processes, information, training of staff to be able to identify when something doesn't look right. In the case from this morning, if there have been a policy in the company saying, if you are in doubt, you take the phone and call, then that would have solved the case and it would have saved the company 500,000 Danish kroners. But it's the processes. The rest of this presentation will focus on the technical things we can do to have a better situation, have better control. Processes will be some other day. Okay? First, I would like to look a little bit on what is it these people are doing? How do they get in? There are three major categories of criminals. There are the hackers. That was actually the first ones. That were teenagers sitting in there and doing hacking for fun, trying to get into systems. Then the cyber criminals. Those are the ones that hit this small Danish company this morning. They are doing it for the money. And then there's the states. And yeah, we will come back to that. But that's, of course, espionage, spying on both industry, on governments. So there are many reasons for nation state doing this. There's often this saying that we as security officers are supposed to be right every time, and oh, sorry, that was not supposed to come there. And the criminals, they only have to be right once. They just have to get one single line in. That is, and that's something that I say. Maybe you can prove me wrong, but I will say that this is not entirely right. Actually, a hacker has to do many things and succeed with many things before actually succeeding with withdrawing money from a situation like this morning. It's well prepared, and they have to do a lot of things right to actually succeed with it. I have a different scenario here. It's from, do you know the Sony breach? Any of you heard about that one? Sony had a major breach, I think 2 years ago, And what happened here is, first of all, the attack starts with research. The attacker start researching about who is responsible in this company, who has access to the right data that we want to get access to. And get passwords, collecting passwords, secure IDs. And the way the criminals do this, it's actually an industry. You can actually, in the black market, you can send out, there are subcontractors, freelancers doing work like, for instance, you can say, I need information about Hefur. I want to know his password. So get me some information about Hefur. He's director of Opin Kerfi. Get me more information. And then there's someone in China. That's what he's doing for a living. So he starts looking at Hefur's Facebook profile, his LinkedIn. What's the name of his Hefur's children? What car is he driving? Where is he living? What's the name of the street? Huge. All sorts of information. What is he fishing every Sunday? Everything he can get information about Hefur. And then when he get all that information available, he sent that as a package, as a deliverable to the contractor. And then they start trying building passwords for Hefur, based on all this information. Okay, so there's a lot of work there. Now, the first thing is that parallel with this, we sent a lot of virus and malware inside Sony organization. And then as soon as one of these pieces of software actually get activated, someone in accountant team press on an email that they shouldn't have pressed on, whatever, that will connect out saying, okay, I'm in, I got an account here. And then they gradually can take over control of persons, and they don't do anything. They don't do any malicious things. They're just there, but we don't know it yet. And now they start trying from that account to reach to Hefur, because it's him we're going for, because he has the secret password for the database. And then continuing doing that until you actually get to that point. And now we have Hefur's password, we have his secure ID, we got control of his PC. So now we can start discovering, trying to collect information about where is that data we are looking for, what is it that's really valuable to Hefur. Sorry that I'm using you as the example, Hefur. I hope that's okay.
That's fine.
Okay. So we're doing the discovery. Next thing we do is we do the capture. We find the data. Now we have to collect the data. We have to compress it so that we can either we don't have to compress it if we just want to if we want to encrypt it, for instance. But if we want to send it out, if we want the data to use it for spying on the company, then we want it out. But if we just want money, then we can just encrypt it. But we still don't tell anyone. We still don't say anything about it. We just get control of it. And then we make this encryption becoming active within 60 days, for instance, or 90 days. Because what happens is we're still running back up. So if we ask him for money right now, he'll just delete the database, restore the database, and then he's back in business. So we don't do that. We don't do anything. We just put the malicious software here and make ready to encrypt the data. And we start doing some encryption so that it's still usable, but every night when we're taking backup, what we're storing on the backup is unusable. And then after 90 days or 100 days or whatever, then we strike. We encrypt the data, and then we send a polite email to Haldor asking him to put some money. And that's what happened to Sony, to pay some money. And Sony estimates that the cost of this breach was about $100 million. So it's really a high cost. Of course, this amount was not just what were paid to the criminals, but also the cost of actually getting back in, having everything up and running again. So, okay, so what am I trying to say with this? I'm trying to say, as you could see in this example, the criminals actually have to do many things to succeed with this. So if we want to change this success rate, we don't have to do everything at the same time, cover everything. We just have to disconnect this wheel somewhere, break it. And there are several ways of doing that. And now we're talking HP software solutions for this. So that's the examples here. The HP security research, that's not something you could do anything about. That's something HP is doing. But on infiltration, we've been talking about the mail infiltration for a period now, but also many infiltrations are happening through our mobile apps, our applications towards our customers. We have invested a huge amount of money in perimeter fences, in firewalls, in physical security, but it's actually the apps, the applications that are the criminals are breaking into. Fortify is a way of securing your applications before you promote them into production. You can actually have them secured, tested. Oh, sorry, that was. Then there's the ArcSight, Dns Malware. I come back to that. ArcSight, the monitoring solution, monitoring what's happening in the environment. Down here, the encryption solutions, protecting your data. So let's say the criminals get to this point, the data they actually get is encrypted. They're not able to use them for anything. And then exfiltration, sorry, that was, again, some services. Hardened applications, well, now that was just what I was saying, right? So we just take this one. The monitoring part. And the analytics. And we got the data protection. Okay. And then there's a few positive words about HP, we actually won the Rsa Award this year for as the best ECM solution. So that's that, and this is by far the most accredited conference in the world when coming to security. So this was a very important win for HP. Gartner have actually for 12 years in a row placed HP's solution in the top leaders quadrant. So this is not something that were invented yesterday. So that's just to say that we're actually doing this out there for many companies already, and HPE is doing it for a lot of companies. 9 out of 10 banks actually using HPE software somewhere for security. 10 out of 10, that's something. Well, this is HP data, so I think we're a little behind schedule, so I'll just go. I would like to now focus on two of the technologies that I've mentioned. And the reason why I focus on these two is because I believe that those two are examples of how we can break that circle that we were talking about. So if we are not doing anything today, then these two things are a very good way to start, because that will give us a way of... before you do this, do the basic monitoring. Collect data, that's also important. But I think probably many of you are collecting log files from your firewalls, from your security logs. That's the basics. Now, format preserving encryption. That is about encrypting your data without completely changing them. In the past, we've the way we encrypted data were that it was simply complete. We encrypted the whole data set. But instead of doing that, we want to encrypt just what is what's needed to make the data unusable. For instance, a credit card number. The first 4 digits, I'll come back to this, the first 4 digits will tell us what card it is. And the last 4 digits will tell us, make us able to say, okay, it's this. If I, for instance, I have several credit cards, then if I call and want to close down one of them or whatever, then I actually only need the 4 last digits. So the 8 digits in the middle, we can actually encrypt those without being able, and still be able to use information. But now it's not possible to withdraw or misuse that information. And that's what format preserving encryption is about. We got the credit card here. National ID. We have a birthday and the social security ID number here. And what we are doing is we're actually keeping the birthday, because we want that when maybe in our when we are doing analysis on our customers or whatever, but we can encrypt this part of it. If we encrypted it like this, then when we move the data to our test environment, then the database would object, that the application would say this is not a valid this is not a valid social security ID, but this one, that will be accepted. That's okay. It's just not the right one, it's an encrypted one. Okay? And the same with the email, you get the point. Now, if we are doing this is a normal situation. We have someone filling in the web form, buying something, and we have several places in our organization where we're using that data. In this example, there's the fraud detection, there's processing, there's some analytics here where we are looking at what statistics on what they're doing. And down here at customer service, if Ellen Smith is calling the service desk, then customer service needing information about Ellen to be able to help her. Now, if we are doing the same thing with format preserving encryption, we can actually help her from the service desk without these digits here. We still have in the service desk to know her name. We can do analytics on customer behavior over here without knowing her name or these digits here, but we want to know that she's using American Express every time she's purchasing something from us. We can do fraud detection. We can see that this is suddenly a new person that we have not been working with before, so we want to do something there to detect if new customers coming in. But of course there is one place where we need the full information, and only one place, and that's the backend where we are processing this transaction. Does it make sense? Now you can actually take this data and you can move it to a test environment, and you will have excellent test data. And you don't have to live up to GDPR rules because you have anonymized them. You don't have to be worried about anyone stealing the test environment. You don't have to keep track of who have access to the test environment because no one can use this information for anything, but you can do the test completely correct now. To me, this is the only way of encrypting. It's much better because now we can it makes it much more useful. In a previous scenario, what we would do is we would decrypt the data every time we were using them. Now we only have to decrypt them one place for one purpose. Okay, that was one thing we could do, and not only do we reduce the risk of a breach, we actually also live up to the GDPR that we've been talking about this morning, because we've anonymized our data, and we all know now after the presentation this morning that then GDPR doesn't apply to it anymore. Then the next technology, how much time do I have? Is it 10 minutes? I think it's 10. Thank you. The next subject is Dns Malware Analytics. And this is very much about breaking that chain that we were talking about before. When we do the infiltration, whether it's through email or through breaking through an application or whatever the criminals succeed with, they need to get out telling the criminal, the software that they they have placed in the organization need to get out and tell the criminals that it successfully got away with getting control of someone's PC. If they can't do that, they can't get to the next step in the circle. And when they're doing that, when they're connecting out, they are connecting out to an IP address. But IP addresses for criminals are changing all the time, so it's using the DNS. And it has some strange DNS names that are also changing all the time. But if we could identify that this, if we could possibly identify that this DNS query is not normal, then we could actually stop them right there. So that's what Dns Malware Analytics is doing. That's exactly what it's doing. It's monitoring all the DNS entries, all the DNS queries, no, not the entries, the DNS queries from all the PTs in the organization. And how do we do that? We're sniffing on the traffic going to our main DNS servers or going out of the company to the DNS, outside DNS servers, and collecting information about these DNS queries. The problem is that the amount of DNS queries is huge. If in a company with thousands of employees, it's billions of queries every day happening to the DNS. So how do we identify the wrong ones? That is what this solution is doing. It's doing analytics, in this case a cloud solution. So it's doing the analytics on this DNS data that's actually filtering 99% of the traffic is actually filtered here, so only 1% goes there, being analyzed. How do we filter? We filter on blacklist, we filter on matching, we filter on statistics. What is the normal behavior on a person working at Simin, for instance? He's usually going on their subcontractors' pages, and he's looking at his Facebook profile, whatever. So it's the same DNS queries they're doing over and over. And if he's doing something different than that, then we are looking at it. And there's, besides blacklist, because there are many products that are looking up on blacklists, but this solution is also looking in other ways on the DNS queries, looking at anomalies on behavior, on the text in these DNS names. Usually it's the DNS names are very long, they are very cryptic, things like that, but they could also be names like these. Now all of these are of course on a blacklist, so that it's not a good example of this, but they are changing all the time, so it's not good enough just to look at blacklists. You have to do analytics on what's unnormal. And then in this case, you can actually see that we can see what PCs in our organization, what clients have been infected, and what clients are trying to get out connecting to someone outside. Now, the good thing for us is that only a few of these will be successful, because the DNS server outside also have blacklists, so it will block many of those. But some of them will be successful. And therefore, in the end, they will get through with what they're doing if we don't know about it. I think that was... Yes, one more thing. There's also a different thing we're looking for. We're looking for how often these DNS queries happen. If it happens very often, then it's likely that it's a machine doing it. Of course, we also have applications inside our organization that can do that, but that's something that we're looking for also. And then, and then we are taking all this information, doing the analytics, and that you remember this narrowing down. We were narrowing down so that we only have to handle a few incidents every day, looking at them, saying, well, is this okay or not? And if we succeed with this, implementing such a tool, we have a way to actually break that circle that we were talking about. Okay? I think that was it. Takeaways from today. I mentioned it already. A good place to start is those two that I've mentioned. But as I said in the beginning, we can't do any of this if we don't do the basic monitoring of security logs. So that's also something you should consider. Okay. What can we do for you? Opin Kerfi, an AM partner and HP. We can assist you in setting up solutions like this at your company. We can do consulting. We can assist you with the processes, enforce your, or not enforce your processes, but assist you in setting up, describing processes, reviewing processes in your organization. And then last but not least, we can actually, because we believe we can actually deliver this as a managed service, security. And the reason why we're doing that is because we actually believe that for medium-sized companies and it's very hard to maintain the right skill level to actually be able to handle situations where there is a breach. So that's why we say we can deliver the Security Operations Center and make that available for that size of companies. Yeah. Thank you.